All right, great. We're ready to get our panel discussion started. A couple of quick announcements. This is the last talk of the evening, and you're in the room where we're going to talk about free speech and decentralization. After this talk, Mass will be celebrated down the hall in the Malvern room, if you so choose, and then the meetups will commence as scheduled, and this evening, and everybody will meet at the registration table, and then, you know, the meetups will kind of diversify there. So let's start with a quick little intro. Free speech, as we know, is hardly free. We know that being in this country for sure. Human flourishing is incumbent upon free speech, and in societies where freedoms are limited by a ruling class, speech is regulated. Increasingly, our Western societies are moving in the direction of some type of totalitarianism where speech is kind of squelched. Attacks on our freedoms, especially the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of religion and thus freedom of speech, are not external but ever more internal. Those attacking our freedom of speech hold positions of power in big tech, big finance, big media, big education. The good news is that there is a solution. Decentralized platforms are comprised of digital protocols distributed across a network of users supported by the community itself rather than a single entity. And here to discuss the relationship between decentralized platforms and free speech are Brian Brown and Michael Matheson Miller. So let me briefly give you a little bit of background of these two gentlemen. Brian is president of International Organization for the Family, which defends the natural family around the globe and hosts the World Congress of Families. He also serves as president of the National Organization for Marriage and president of, you want to say that, is it Inunday, okay, which, among other tech-related activities, is involved in Bitcoin mining in Eastern Europe. And Brian's also a partner in new business at Altern Cloud, which provides hosting solutions to Catholic and conservative organizations that are at risk of being canceled by big tech. And Brian's been published regularly in most of the nation's most prestigious newspapers, including the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. He's appeared regularly on all legacy cable news networks and business networks. He's an unabashed Catholic, and he and his wife Susan are the parents of 9 children. Michael Matheson Miller, who you may have heard speak earlier in one of the other rooms today, is a senior research fellow at the Acton Institute. He's the director and producer of the award-winning documentary Poverty, Inc., as well as the Poverty Cure DVD series, the Good Society series, and the Gospel of Work. He was founding director of Poverty Cure, an initiative that promotes entrepreneurial solutions to poverty in the developing world, and is the host of the Moral Imagination podcast, a co-founder of biotech firm focusing on extending health span, and the author of Digital Contagion: 10 Steps to Protect Your Family and Business from Intrusion, Cancel Culture, and Surveillance Capitalism. And the forthcoming Excluded: How the Poverty Industry Excludes the Poor from Justice and Prosperity. Michael and his wife, Rebecca, have 7 children and live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when both families are together, we have a football team. Just kidding. This track ends, we're going to have about another 35 minutes if I shut up here. And I have a series of questions. We'll open the floor to your questions as well. So, we'll all have a chance to get involved with the discussion. So let's talk about the current cancel culture. It's a big deal right now, gentlemen. You know that. Brian, your organization, the International Organization for the Family, was canceled by big tech. Can you describe what happened there?
Well, the most recent example, there are a few examples, heading up a group that defends the natural family, defends marriage as the union of a man and a woman. We've been through a lot of fights. The most recent, though, makes clear that the power that big tech has, especially when it comes to payment processing, and also underlines the significance and I think the importance from now into the future in accepting cryptocurrency and in having alternate methods of taking payments, because the International Organization for the Family, we do large World Congress of Families around the world. We just had one in Mexico City with over 9,000 people. We're pretty well respected. We've had, Catholic bishops, evangelical leaders. We're not hiding who we are, and woke up one day and realized that no donations were being processed. Nothing. And I looked around, called a few folks and said, what's going on? What's the problem? And as many folks do, we had a very good processor. Stripe is a $75 billion company. It's increasingly taking market share on credit card processing. And I looked around, and finally I found an email saying, we have decided that your organization's stances conflict with our terms of service, and therefore we have halted all payment processing as of today. No other warning. I went back and I said, I wanted a lawyer to look, and I looked. I said, what terms of service did we break? From the very beginning, we had looked at the terms of service, and this is very important. They'll change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. They don't care. We didn't break any terms of service. What they did is take one line about discrimination and then act as if the line saying that you wouldn't discriminate is then applied to our position on marriage. They pulled the plug. Now, that was bad, but we had so many monthly recurring donors, people who send us $5, $10, $15. And as many of you are aware, with Stripe or any other credit card processor, you don't get the information of the credit card number and everything else. All of that has to be encrypted, even for Stripe. And so when we write to them, we say, well, what about all of our monthly donors? We have the right to move to a different service. And they said, we'll get back to you on that. I said, no, this needs to be done immediately. Finally, under the threat of a lawsuit, again, this is a $75 billion company. We're a relatively small, about $1 million a year organization. You really think we're going to go toe-to-toe with them? Even so, under the threat of a lawsuit, they finally allowed us to get all of our monthly donors transferred to another a credit card processing company, a Christian credit card processing company that we've had great experience with. But this made me realize how at risk all of us are. And that was not the first time. We had, under the National Organization for Marriage, we had the IRS leak our donor names to the public. So this sort of attack from both big tech and government is serious, and it can shut you down. Luckily, we weren't shut down, but it opened my eyes up to the fact that we need alternate methods of banking, alternate methods of processing, and we need decentralized methods to deal with this cancel culture. And if we don't do it quickly, we will not be the only ones. We already know we're not the only ones. One final point. That was bad enough, but the biggest inflection point to me, and the most, I think, underreported reality that we face, is that in January of 2021, AWS turned the light switch off on Parler. They just turned it off at the infrastructure level. We could talk all we want about building competing applications on the front end, of having our own social media. We could talk all we want about that. But if the infrastructure of the internet, if cloud computing servers are turned off on us, you can't just go somewhere else. And the market share of AWS, of Azure, of all these big cloud service providers is so huge, very difficult to find something out. And that's why, together with David Lejeune, we founded this Altern Cloud to make sure that at the base level, we don't get shut down.
Now, is Altern Cloud based on blockchain technology?
No, we use blockchain technology. It's not based on blockchain technology. There are great other solutions, as you know, Filecoin, storage, that use unused computing power, but they're not built to do the sort of thing we want to be able to do, an enterprise-level, redundant cloud server hosting system. At this point, you're not going to build that all on blockchain. We're not at that level yet, and many enterprise level companies and businesses want the security of bare metal racks. That's what we provide, bare metal racks in redundant jurisdictions. So if one jurisdiction says, hey, you're done, well, everything's also over here in another jurisdiction. Okay. So I think at this point, these are the sorts of things we need. Using blockchain technology when you can, and again, I'm a big fan of storage, and there's also CEDOS. There's a lot of good things happening, but at the level of when you want a business or a nonprofit or even a government to have security, you're going to need something that replicates the best of what AWS and Azure do, but eliminates the worst, and that's what we're trying to do.
All right. Michael, do you want to weigh in on that?
So thanks for the invitation to be on this panel. I mean, I think Brian's points are there's not much to add. I think it's very important that in a sense we've been operating understandably on this idea that kind of code is neutral and all these things are neutral and we're just users of it. But what we're finding out is that there's an underlying philosophical worldview that not only shapes the code, but shapes the people who are making the code. And we are in an anthropological battle. So, I mean, let me say on the tech side, I think that's exactly right. The redundancy point is very, very important. We have to own our own data. So, like, as a very simple example, if we're going to use, say, platforms like YouTube or Twitter or whatever, and you put your Facebook, you put your material on there, you have to make sure it's redundant. If you have email lists on an email provider like MailChimp or whatever, you have to make sure you have backups of all of those things. And this is, I think, one of the problems that you faced with Stripe is that you, in a sense, you didn't expect it until later. And I think we have to be prepared for it. And so that's, I think Brian's explained it, I don't need to add anything there. But I do think that what it reflects is that we are in a deep anthropological battle of what it means to be a human person. And that this is, in many ways, a religious battle. And so we talk a lot about secularism, but I would argue that secularism is almost over, and that we have moved from secularism into a re-mythologization, a re-divinization, and so we're dealing with a transhumanist, transgender vision of the person that it rejects our embodied, embedded nature. And so this is not simply, and then you deal with that plus contagion, and the fact that everyone has to be socially fashionable. And we're really under threats that we haven't been under before. And so I think this is why in my talk I talked about the importance of what Václav Benda called a parallel polis. That is, not necessarily escaping into siege, but creating institutions and structures that enable people to operate in the world and thereby be 11 in the world. And so I think what you're doing with like Altern and the other things, and then of course blockchain and decentralization, so in a simple way maybe to think about it is, we have to be prepared to be shut down and start the next day. Okay, maybe it'll take 3 days, but we have to be able to prepare so that we're not in a situation where we say, we have to ask Stripe or somebody else to help us. We have to already prepare that we're going to be shut down, and then we have to build those infrastructures. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, and I said this in my talk, so pardon the repetition, but I think a lot of the focus was on, oh, we have to build a new Twitter or new Facebook. Okay, that's fine, but I mean, the network effects there are so great. I mean, maybe we're going to compete, maybe not. What I actually think we need to focus on is what you're doing is the infrastructure that allows businesses and individuals to operate without threat of deplatforming.
Well, there's so much there. I'm going to jump on, you mentioned Twitter, and Elon Musk has been in the news a lot, kind of sidelined a little by FTX, but I've heard it said that, you know, where he wants to take Twitter perhaps is on a decentralized platform, and maybe there's a race to get there. Any thoughts about that and the whole Twitter debacle?
Well, I've lived in two different worlds. 8 years ago, I built my first Ethereum miner, and I got heavily into Bitcoin mining. We have a Bitcoin mining facility in Serbia, and I've tried to keep up, and you can never keep up, on everything that's coming out with decentralized apps, attempts to back social media with blockchain. I was an early adopter of PPIF. You've got Steemit. You've got all of these things. But the big problem is what you pointed to. The fundamental reality is that from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, the interactivity that Web 2.0 allowed, Web 1.0, other than a few guys on Usenet and some other things, most of it was putting up a blog, and I would go onto the computer, I would read the blog, I might type a little comment, but then from the 90s to 2000, everything became so much more interactive. Everything was and that interactivity, the early movers, and again, someone pointed out, well, MySpace was early. Well, Facebook figured out what was bad about MySpace and did a better job. That's why they won, but they were still an early mover. So many people came in, and with Twitter, that I find it hard to believe that you're going to be able to create a full-on mirror of that that's much more open. So having said all that, I do have hope that what Elon's doing will improve Twitter. I don't believe that this is going to solve all of our problems. I don't believe that it will fix everything, but at least there's now another voice out there saying many of the things we were saying, like, why the heck did you ban us for posting about the fact that a man is a man and a woman is a woman? At least we now have someone that's sympathetic. And so I think that's already created a change because it's forced a conversation where people can't just say you're crazy. When I first said Stripe shut us down to our email list, the left was having a field day. He's making it up. It's all a bunch of lies. It's not true. And I feel that that's also the same with Twitter and Facebook. For those of us that hold, quote, controversial opinions, we know that they're after us. I mean, we know that when I try and put an ad on Facebook, I can guarantee you what ads they will say, no, it's not going up. And I can also tell you that we're not breaking their terms of service. They just don't like the ad. I'm not that sanguine about us being able to go toe-to-toe with something huge, but I do see that there's a fracturing happening, and I do think we'll be able to have our own spaces, and especially having our own spaces built upon the blockchain is the future. I think we're a little bit away from it. I think Web 3.0 will do it, but honestly, even with PPIF and some of these other things, you're on your mobile phone, and you've got to remember what wallet you use for Ethereum so that you have the right account open. Most non-nerds aren't going to do that. We have to figure out a solution, and I think we're getting there, where it's easy to take part in these newer technologies. It's just as easy as before, but has the safety, the privacy. I'm a huge fan of the Brave browser. Brendan Eich is another guy who got canceled. I mean, a genius. Creator of JavaScript, Mozilla, gave $1,000, well, to us. We helped run the campaign to define marriage in the California Constitution as the union of a man and a woman. By 52%, we won. It wasn't a crazy idea. Brendan Eich gives $1,000, he gets fired. Yeah. It's insane. But he went out and created something new. Brave browser uses a token, basic attention token, and it pays essentially you, the viewer, when you consume a commercial, you click on something, you get a little bit of BAT. That's a genius idea. It's working very well. If any of you, I don't own Brave. I have a little bit of BAT, but I'm not doing this to make anyone money. I'm just telling you, these are the sorts of very smart usage of the blockchain that I think you're going to see more and more, and there's a lot of users. Brave is grown, and as we see, this is very important. I don't want to take a lot of time, but you can't separate freedom of speech from freedom of conscience from privacy and association. They're all connected. If you think about Thomas More, why was he killed? Was it only over his religious conscience? No, they wanted him to say certain things. The king wanted him to say something that wasn't true. Compelled speech. That's closely connected with our rights of conscience. And you'll hear, it's so funny how now the left, the things that it used to love, like the ACLU used to say, I may hate what you say, but I'll fight for your right to say it. They're not saying that anymore. No. We're the ones saying that.
It's flipped around.
and so we're the ones saying it, but the reality is that this compulsion of speech we cannot accept. We cannot be compelled to say something we know is untrue, and we can't be restricted from saying what we know is true. And this goes back to Aquinas, lex injusta est non lex. An unjust law is not a law at all. So if governments and huge corporations, I mean, I think Meta and Amazon and Google together, it's over $3 trillion. This is the gross domestic product of France. Don't come to me and say, well, this is just freedom. This is just, no. They change their terms of service to do what they want to do. This is not about freedom, and the power they hold in something that should be the digital public square is not a digital public square if you punish, repress, and marginalize all of the opinions that you don't like. It's not freedom. It's an attack on freedom, and we have to stand against it. And I do think that that Web 3.0, decentralized technologies offer us a ton of hope. I just don't think we're there yet. We need a lot of smart people, and we need a lot more people that are Catholic, evangelicals, whoever, that realize the importance of this. When we go to our donors and talk about it, people are like, what are you talking about? I mean, Bitcoin is like a big Ponzi scheme. And especially when you have older donors, we have to get out there and be vocal advocates and learn about this and be able to let other people know what great solutions this technology offers for us in the future. And people got to start building. We got to build.
Which is why we're having the conversation. You know, you mentioned censorship, and unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of kind of imposed self-censorship. Most of us self-censor a lot, you know, and it brings up the topic of regulation. Let's play devil's advocate. If society adopts decentralized platforms en masse, is there a need for some sort of compliance, and what does that look like? Michael, do you?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to talk about compliance, because if you took my advice, that'd be bad. But I do think something you said important first. So there's two things that come up. One is, you're right that there's a lot of self-censorship. And part of this, I think, is connected to Brian's point. So why do we self-censor? Well, we're self-censored because there's cost to speaking. And so part of what we have to do is, in a sense, reduce the cost of speaking. And that's why redundancy and what we both talked about earlier, to move into these decentralized platforms, to be able to use various existing and then hopefully build more decentralized technology so that we don't have to be afraid of the repercussions. And so payments, I think, is really important. I mentioned in my talk on the parallel polis, we need to build credit unions and insurance and a host of other things so that we can operate in the world. Second, I think we need to, and I'm glad you brought up St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, I think we're actually also dealing with the question of justice. And so when we hear things about, say, you know, gender or pronouns or whatever, I think we have to be able to easily and freely say that I will not participate in this type of injustice against the poor and the vulnerable. And so what we have is a situation where we have people who are vulnerable, they're going through difficult times, and you have adults who are either using them for sexual gratification or for political tools to manipulate people and to gaslight people into this whole system of gender surgery, and we relegate people to their identity. Well, we don't relegate people to their identity if you have anorexia. We don't say to you, you know, I'm sorry you were beaten or abused and that you're anorexic, but that's who you are. Embrace it. We don't do that. But when it comes to like sexual predilection, we have a whole thing where we acquit the abuser, because oftentimes there's abuse behind it, and we say, we relegate that person to their identity. And so part of what we have to do is actually speak the truth in love and not participate in injustice. And that has to go along with, you know, being wise as serpents and innocent as doves, that we have to actually build structures that enable us to speak without some of the fear that's coming there. And so I think, and the reality is, though, I mean, we're dealing with really complex questions because one of the problems, and this has to do with Section 230, one of the problems that happens with technology and speech is that in some ways, some speech does have to be regulated. We don't want absolutely everything on the internet. We don't want the internet filled with pornography, right? Because pornography is a moral evil. We don't want the internet filled with all this kind of junk. And so the question is, but the problem we have, and it's a very big one, is that we have lost any sense of justice. So we've equated what is moral with what is legal. And so if abortion is legal, oh, therefore it's moral. And so we've lost a deep moral foundation. So we have like multiple levels of work to do that are really hard. And that's why, you know, Jesus is not a technical Messiah. He did not give a technical solution to the problems of evil, sin, suffering, and death. And there is no technical solution. But there's multiple elements from law, politics, economics, from courageous speaking, evangelization, and I think Brian's absolutely right, that decentralized technology that creates redundancy and protection for us to live. And as I said in my talk, like, look, at some point, if the state's going to come down on hard despotism, better that we have associations and redundant technologies that force them to actually tell us you can't say those things than to turn off the spigots by outsourcing, having the regime outsource their despotism to tech companies.
Yeah, and you know, for those who weren't in Michael's talk earlier, Parallel Polis, you mentioned, you know, the right to association is part of the First Amendment, free speech, freedom of religion, right of association. And forming religious associations, which you mentioned, sounds like a good idea, but a very arduous task. What does the process look like, and how long does it take? Can you point to an example in history where, well, you did point to several where associations, you know, were very successful. What does that look like for us today?
I mean, I think, so we were having conversations both during the talk and after, so I apologize to those of you who've heard some of this. But afterwards, I mean, this is, I think, it's a multifaceted approach. I mean, so one of the things that it looks like we have to do, as Brian brought up, you know, there are three rights in the First Amendment, right? It's speech, religion, and association. And association's basically being crushed. And there's complex historical reasons why that's the case, but which we can talk about. So it looks like that we have to create, in a sense, Catholic membership mutual aid societies, where you join with a clear mission statement and a belief statement. And so instead of having like, I'm going to go to the doctor and just pay the doctor in commutative justice, we actually have to create membership organizations. And I think there's some interesting things we can probably do with like decentralized finance as well. And then those we have to create multiple layers around them. But we have lots of historical evidence of this. We have mutual aid societies before the welfare state. I mean, before the welfare state, if you look at England, for example, there are multiple types of mutual aid societies that diversify risk, where people help each other. As I mentioned in the talk, Alexis de Tocqueville says in America, everybody forms associations. And so I think that we have to create, in a sense, we have to work with lawyers to create the legal structures of how these are built. We have to work with people in finance to create credit unions and banking and other services. And then we're going to have to, besides the basic templates, we're going to have to work on specific templates to move around the regulatory elements in each of like medicine and insurance and whatsoever. So I think it's an arduous task, but it's also deeply part of the history of Catholic understanding of solidarity and subsidiarity. And I think it's a necessary task. I mean, the reality is, it would be easier if we didn't have to do it.
Right.
It'd be easier just to keep your health insurance and not have to move out into something else. It would be easier to not have to switch your bank to another credit union. But if you're going to get deplatformed or your payments aren't going to get through, and that's going to happen, and I'm telling you, it's coming. It already happened to you.
Right.
And if you look at, I live in Michigan, if you look at Michigan Proposal 3, I mean, it's coming. We cannot escape it. And I said this before, so apologize for the from this afternoon or this morning, but there is a new ontology of the person that's being written into law. It's in the UN law, Uganda principles, it's in South African law, it's in German law, it's increasingly in US law and civil rights law, and it identifies sexual predilection with being. And so therefore, the argument that if you have a traditional understanding of the human person as embodied and embedded, or a traditional understanding of marriage, then you are actively discriminating against someone. And once that's written into law, then the only way out is, well, you have a religious exemption. Well, the problem is, now I'm Catholic, I love the Catholic Church, but you know what? The Catholic Church is going to look out for itself. They're going to say, look, we have a religious exemption, but what if you own companies, or you're a doctor, or you run these nonprofits? So we have to create these parallel polis mutual aid societies, because I think the reality, and the last thing I'll say is it does give us political and social influence so that we can push back, because the individual cannot compete against the massive Leviathan state, right? And so if you heard me, I love this quote from Tocqueville. He says, the tyrant doesn't care whether you love him or not, as long as you don't love one another. Yeah. And so that's why we have to build these associations. We cannot just do it in individuals.
We have about 5 minutes left. If anybody has a question, we'll try to get to it. If you want to come up, the microphone is set up. I think it's interesting, so much that you've said today, and for somebody who's an extreme novice at all of this, like myself, and I think I'm not alone here, when I said, you laid out what we could do about associations, some next steps, but what could we here today do, aside from going home and telling our friends, Catholic or non, hey, this is something you need to look into? Are there concrete steps or something that you would recommend, or just keep the conversation going? Maybe it is that simple.
Just one thing I think we have to really do, which kind of echoes what you said, is we have to work on, and this is like something I have to work on, we all have to work on, we have to work on clear articulation of the problem, because right now it's a little, it's a little bit hard to follow. We're distributed ledger technology and Bitcoin and crypto, and as you said, well, I don't understand that. It's too hard to understand. And so I think part of what we have to do is really articulate very clearly what the situation is, and then we have to work with people from different expertise to actually build plug-and-play templates.
Some messaging, right?
So we have to do messaging, but also plug-and-play applications that where with both technology and social and legal plug-and-play, we have to teach people how to do these things, and I think that's going to create that's going to need a lot of people working on it.
And I think we'll get there. I think we did it with Web 1, Web 2. We'll do it with Web 3. Your question?
Any thoughts on the Respect for Marriage Act that just went through the Senate and probably will be voted on? It happened yesterday.
Yeah, we've been fighting what I would call the Disrespect for Marriage Act, which would codify Obergefell. We had so many states. I traveled from state to state, and we passed all of these referenda from Proposition 8 in California. When I moved to California, all my friends said, you're absolutely insane. California will never vote to define marriage as the union of a man and a woman. And all the polling was wrong. Everyone was wrong. When you let people vote, and again, this goes to referenda is actually a very good example of decentralization. The powerful people never wanted the people to be able to vote on marriage. Whether they were senators, whether they were leaders of corporate America, they didn't want it. When the people voted, they said no. Then we get to the court and we get the Roe versus Wade. Obergefell is essentially Roe versus Wade on the marriage issue. It's taking the 60 million votes from North Carolina, from Hawaii, from all over, just throwing them in the trash, saying your opinion doesn't matter. Now we have some, and this goes to what you were just talking about, we have some, even in some religious organizations that are saying, well, we don't want to fight this, it's too tough. Let's just take the carve-outs we can get, and let's have them they'll codify same-sex marriage on a federal level, which, by the way, in the Windsor decision, the court said the federal government couldn't codify a definition of marriage as the union of a man and a woman, so why now can they codify a new definition? So there's constitutional issues with this. But we had religious organizations, unfortunately, some folks that we've been friends with for years saying, well, there are carve-outs for religious organizations. They added some language that will protect the tax-exempt status of groups like mine in churches. There are some other things that will stop lawsuits about adoption. It's all a lie, folks. We were told the same thing after passage of all of these referenda. We were told that we were throwing out red herrings about what the consequences were. The consequences were worse. We said that Catholic adoption agencies were going to be sued. We said that organizations that stood up for traditional marriage were going to be punished in the law. We said tax-exempt status was at stake, and they said, oh, no, you're just exaggerating. It was all true, and it was worse. And this...
It's worse in Michigan right now, where you have abortion until birth, minors, no parental consent, no parental notification, and sterilization of minors with no parental notification or consent. I mean, it's absolutely a transhumanist, hellscape.
This is what, and I think that your way of describing this is so true, because in my view, this is like a new religion. Eric Voegelin talked about how communists immanentized the eschaton, meaning
exactly
they tried to bring heaven to earth. What we now have, and I'm not saying this is, there are very good folks that have some very bad ideas. They haven't necessarily thought it all through. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people at the top, the people who are thinking this through. There is a new religion with its own sacraments, its own liturgy, its own mode of excommunication. Why was it important for Stripe to get rid of us? Southern Poverty Law Center has called a number of organizations, like Alliance Defending Freedom, Focus on the Family, our organization, hate groups. Why? Because they want to put us right next to people that we know are evil and wrong, people who endorse racial segregation. Obviously, we oppose all that, but they want to put the old religion in the same place as something that is based on hate, and then excommunicate you. Yep. And then there's a rite, there's a liturgy. All of this is like a new religion. If you ever wonder, why is there such motivation? This is not just based on, I have my ideas, you have your ideas. Yeah. This is an absolutist new religion that seeks, and I'll say it again, punish, repress, and marginalize opponents. We need to show love, and we should always show love, but love is speaking truth to power. Love is being Thomas More when you're told to lie against your conscience. And I'll tell you, what I think we need to do, obviously we need to build. We need a parallel economy. We need all of this. But the one thing we need is we need men and women like you who are willing to stand up and have the courage to take some punishment, to not be silent. Because if we all shut our mouths, this is going to get worse and worse and worse. And the key to building a new culture is the ability to stand up for what you believe. Stand up, get involved, do something, even if it's just stating what you believe. That is at least a first step to not losing who you are.
We're running out of time.
Yes, I just want to add, I think that's super important that we need to create the parallel policy, and we need to create plausibility structures and ways of living, because the reality is we have to speak the truth in love, and we have to affirm justice and the goodness of the human person. But we're in a situation where I've described before that we have, this technocracy on one side, and by the way, there's a connection between this pure, what Augusto Del Noce, the Catholic philosopher, calls pure bourgeois, where everything is a transaction. The hippies became yuppies, and all material happiness is a transaction. That's on one side, and that connects into digital culture. Right? There's deep connections between the Burning Man principles and Google. Okay, so we're dealing with this whole side here. And that's why technology is not neutral, and so we have to build better technologies. But I also think we have to just, as we build the parallel policy, the parallel economy, one of the things that's a joy is that we affirm the goodness of being, the goodness of children, the goodness of the body. We get our bodies back at the end. We're not trying to escape from our body. And the reality is nihilism is knocking on the door as well. And there's unhappiness, there's sadness, there's mental anxiety, there's drug abuse, suicides, etc. So part of what we have to do is, as we build these communities, we build a civilization of love. And in the civilization of love, people are attracted to find out what happens. And that's why I think we have to tell the truth in love and then live the best we can, and avoid falling into just using injustice to get our way. We have to obey the demands of justice, because it's better, as we know from Socrates and we know from the Christian tradition, it's better to suffer injustice than to do it. And I think that's another part of just speaking the truth in love and then taking the consequences as they come.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm sorry we are over time. Please, I'm sure both Brian Brown and Michael Matheson Miller will answer your questions, but I do need to let everybody go in case you wanted to celebrate Mass, which is going to begins shortly. And also remember that, and I have this just in, wait, breaking news. If you're interested in participating in the strategy sessions about making a college curriculum, meet at the registration table this evening at 7:30. That's where all the meetups will gather, and I believe there's going to be 3 meetup groups, and that is one of them, or maybe that's a 4th, I'm not quite clear. But quick shout out again to our founding sponsors, Ave Maria University, Crescite, Solidarity Health Share, Visiting Angels Home Healthcare. Again, Brian Brown, Michael Matheson Miller, thank you so much for your insight.
Yeah.